So today we're going to be making a tier list for Jujutsu Kaisen. The first off is going to be focusing on the anime only abilities and spells. I think these are all of the spells and abilities we've seen so far. And without any further ado, let's dive into it. We have barriers first. I think barriers are kind of useful in certain circumstances. There are multiple different kinds of them and they can be pretty effective. So I think it gives it a good B tier for this. Then we have a curtain. This is pretty much just a veil to prevent people from seeing stuff and keeps the cursed energy in. It's conditionally useful, but I don't see it being particularly effective in fights. In some cases, it's good for the strategy and sort of keeping things hidden. This goes into the D tier. Then we have the Binding Vow. Binding Vow isn't a thing that's going to be determining any fight, so I think I'll place this in E tier. So now we have Revealing One's Hand. It allows a person that has a specific ability to sort of add a multiplier on top of it. So if the base ability is good, that multiplier will just make it stronger, which is interesting. I think I'd give this a C. Next up, we have Domain Amplification. I think the only use case for this ability was against Gojo, and using this, the person can't use any of their other innate abilities. So I think this would be a solid D tier. Next, we have Falling Blossom Emotion. This is good for using in a case where a person is stuck in a domain. This is like the opposite of the domain amplification. This works inside a domain. So I'm gonna put it in C tier. While it doesn't, Curtain would probably go after domain amplification because its use case is very, very minimal. Next up, we have Hyper Regeneration. It's like the reverse curse technique, but only for curses. It's good, and there is some sort of a limit to it, but overall it seems like it allows them to consistently just heal back up. I think this is a good B tier. Next up, we have Heavenly Restriction. Just a massive double-edged sword. I'd say it's super low in the C tier. Anyway, next up, we have Black Flash. This is the ability that's used by Yuji, including Nobara, Todo, and a few others. It just applies a stronger attack a few milliseconds after an attack has been launched. I think I'd put this up in B tier. Next up, we have Reverse Curse Technique. This is a good ability. It's like hyper regeneration, but it's based on the person's cursed energy, and it can also heal them quite considerably. I think I'd place this in a low B tier. We've seen a lot of people use this ability. We've seen Yuta use this, we've seen Gojo use this, Shoko also uses this. It has use cases and it's effective. It can save a life, pretty much. Next up, we have Simple Domain. We've seen a bunch of people use this as well. We've seen Mekamaru use this, we've seen Miwa use this. It's more of a defensive technique, but I'd place it a bit lower than Falling Blossom Emotion. So Bato Sword drawing greatly improves the drawing speed of the blade, so it's pretty effective in that sense. But it only works in a person that's situated right in front of you. I'd place it in C tier. It's better than Domain Amplification. Okay, next up we have the Rot Technique. This gives the person blood which is poisonous and has corrosive properties, and it also gives them the ability to manipulate their blood. So this has like a few use cases. Rot Technique, it's good for fights for sure. It also has a maximum Wing King ability which gives you like more defensive abilities, and it makes the Rot Technique stronger. Overall, I think this is a good B tier technique. I think barriers would be low B tier. Okay, so next up we have the Blood Manipulation, which is used by Choso and Noritoshi Kamo. Blood Manipulation is definitely strong. I think I would put Blood Manipulation in A tier. It has a bunch of abilities like you can coat the body in the blood and improve the energy and the damage and physical capabilities. Along with this, we've seen Crimson Binding, which was an ability where the blood sort of explodes and turns into a jail for the person. Then we had Slicing Exorcism, which was like a long-range attack which just tears through everything. Convergence, which basically brought the blood into like a small little bullet sort of thing, and it was used through Piercing Blood and Supernova, both of which were pretty damaging. The bullet itself was pretty strong, and Supernova was a good way of getting a person to be sort of caught blindsided, and the explosions would do a decent amount of damage from the looks of it. Finally, we had the Blood Edge, which was like a sword made out of blood, and Blood Meteorite. It was big, the earlier Piercing Blood, but it was far more weaker. Overall, not worth considering too much when you have the Piercing Blood. Yeah, I think Blood Manipulation is a good A tier ability. It's definitely very strong. Stronger than the Rot Technique at least. Then we have Projection Sorcery. This was a very confusing ability. This brings things down like 24 frames per second, and each frame you map out what you're doing. If anything, it was like a multiplier for speed, but it also has some drawbacks because you have to plan out your move, and if anything comes between that might be stronger than you might have to stop. This is a low B tier. It's strong, but it's not that strong. Mostly just a speed amp. Next up is Mai Zenin, which was Construction. Her ability was largely focused around using her cursed energy to create an object, which was a bullet, and it would tire her out quite a lot. But the higher the person has cursed energy, the more they would be able to withstand. So from that perspective, it's pretty strong. You can make a bunch of different things to sort of improve your abilities. I place it above Rot Technique. Okay, next up we have Nobara and her straw doll technique. I think this is a good high B tier technique. We're also going to be including the nails that she uses. Her ability has resonance and she has hairpin. Resonance, she uses a straw doll to act as a proxy which will damage a person regardless of where they are, which is pretty strong as long as Nobara has an appendage. And hairpin is like an explosion. I think the only thing limiting this ability that we've seen so far is the fact that Nobara doesn't have that much cursed energy. The higher a person's cursed energy, this would be a lot stronger. So high B tier fits this. Next up we have Yuji with his Divergent Fist. I think this is about as strong as the Black Flash. It's like a lower version of the Black Flash where it applied a lot of damage to the person, a bit more delayed. And now that I think about it a bit more, I think Divergent Fist might be in the C tier. Somewhere around here. Like, it does have a use case and it is decent in some circumstances, but it's not the strongest, and Black Flash is way stronger. So yeah. Okay, next up we have Mahito and his Idol Transfiguration. I think this belongs in the A tier, at least high A tier. We've seen Mahito dish out a lot of damage. We've seen Mahito heal a person that had Heavenly Restriction, get an army of monsters just through this ability, and it allows him to transform into different shapes and sizes to sort of suit the kind of battle that he's having. So I think this is either high A tier or it's low S tier. I think it actually fits in S tier. It's one of the strongest abilities. Next up we have Ogami and her Seance technique. We saw her transform into another person, which is pretty good for camouflage, and we saw her bring Toji back to life. It's a bit of a double-edged sword where the other person could end up losing their soul. Next up we have Panda and his Gorilla mode. While the Gorilla mode is definitely strong, it's not overwhelmingly strong or anything. He's been able to crush Mechamaru because of it, but that was just ultimate Mechamaru. Overall, I'd put this in the C tier. After this we have the Bagged Masked Man and his cloning technique. It's a pretty strong ability. I'd actually put this above Hyper Regeneration. It's like a Kagebunshin no Jutsu, but if there were 4 Yutas, that would still be really strong. Okay, so now that I'm thinking about it, we might not really need an E tier, so I'm just gonna move this up to over here. This fits in the low D tier category. Okay, so next up we have Junpei Yoshino and his Moonregs. Very weak and unskilled Yuji was able to beat him, so I think this fits somewhere right here. Not that strong. Next we have Toge Inumaki and his Cursed Speech. This is an interesting one because it's a double-edged sword in the sense that the person can't talk anymore, but it does have some pretty impressive use cases, and I'm guessing it's tied to the amount of cursed energy that the other person has, so they can use it effectively against a lot of people. I'd put this in a high B tier. It's effective and it does the job. So the different versions of this that we saw was Explode, Get Twisted, we saw Get Crushed, Crumble Away or Plummet, Don't Move, we saw Sleep, Return, Run Away, Blast Away, and Die. So a lot of cases where it could work against Shikigami, it could work against users defensively, it could work offensively. I think high B tier could definitely work. Next up we have Yaga and his Cursed Corpse. An interesting one because the kind of cursed corpses that we've seen so far, like Panda, they can be strong, but we haven't seen the full potential of it, I think. So it might not be that effective in a fight. So I'm gonna put Cursed Corpse above Seance. Next up we have Inverse. This is an interesting one because you can avoid any kind of damage, but at the same time it doesn't offer anything other than defensive capabilities. You're just preventing damage that's super strong, and if you get hit by something that's a bit weaker, it's just gonna finish you off. So I would actually put this below Domain Amplification. Okay, next up we have Haruta Shigemu's Miracles. He's like a cat with 9 lives. And it takes like everyday miracles and it sort of saves them up for the person to use at a certain point in time. It's definitely strong, but we don't know what exactly goes into getting these miracles. I mean, it could prevent you from dying, so it's definitely somewhere in the B tier. It's effective and it does the job. I'd actually place this above Hyper Regeneration. Okay, next up we have Hanami's Disaster Plants. We've seen these used in a bunch of scenarios and they're pretty strong as well. Someone with high enough cursed energy would be able to dish out a lot of damage like we saw Hanami do. It has the ability to grow roots, it has wooden balls which are like bullets, it has cursed buds which can sort of like suck a person's cursed energy. And then there's the Flower Field, which basically makes a person lose their desire to fight. And it was somewhat effective against Gojo as well. So I'd put Disaster Plants at the high B tier. It's a strong ability and it can dish out a lot of damage as well. Okay, next up we have Ino's Auspicious Beast Summon. This is like a small multiplier for his offensive abilities and his defensive abilities, but they're pretty small and negligible. Against a stronger opponent, this would be pretty useless like we saw. So I think this goes right in the C tier, below Gorilla Mode. Yeah, this fits. Next up we have Aoi Todo's Boogie Boogie. This basically activates when he claps his hands and he switches position with something or someone, and it is good for throwing the other person off. In certain use cases it would be effective. I think aside from the fact that Aoi himself is pretty strong, this Boogie Boogie doesn't amplify his abilities too much. I'd place this above the Auspicious Beast Summons but below Gorilla Mode. Then we have Gaku Kanji's Sound Amp. This transformed his guitar sound into like cursed energy blasts, which was interesting, but it was all predicated on his own guitar. I think this fits somewhere in the C tier as well. I don't imagine it being too useful against a person that has very good abilities. Okay, so I reworked the tier lists a bit and this is what I've ended up at. S tier is going to be the OP abilities. A has multiple uses which are both effective either defensively or offensive in multiple different ways. B is one-dimensional, they only do the one thing that they set out to. C is situational at best, and D is it just exists. It's like, okay, it's a thing. Anyway, let's move forward with Dagon. First up is his Disaster Tides. Through this, he can produce a massive wave of water without any source of water. He can also use this defensively and offensively, and this is where it fits. Then we have his Shikigami, which is a man-eating fish and a sea serpent. They are one-dimensional and they're relatively straightforward. They just come and they attack. I think this fits somewhere around here. Then we have the Death Swarm, which is pretty much the previous attack with like a huge combination of Shikigami. But this is connected to his domain expansion, so we don't know if it can be used outside of it. This fits here. I think his Disaster Tides is where he wins. Anyway, moving forward, we have Jogo and his Disaster Flames. He can generate flames or shoot heat rays from his palms or manifest small volcanic openings in the environment that erupted his powerful beams as well. We haven't really seen him use it defensively, but offensively it's dealt a lot of damage straight up in terms of the impact damage and also the lingering damage, so I think I'd put this in high B tier. Then we have his Ember Insects, which are again pretty much the same thing as Disaster Flames, but they're like homing Disaster Flames which are in a much smaller size. So they're a bit weak, but they definitely have a use case as well. I think that's where it fits. Then we have Nanako and her photo manipulation. We don't exactly know the name for this ability, but she takes a picture and she does something with the picture and manipulates it. She can use it to move out of spaces, so it's effective in that sense. I might actually move it down here. Then we have Hidden Inventory. This is great for cursed objects. We don't know the exact limit of how much of it can carry. Someone that uses a cursed object would be very well equipped with this thing, so I would say it's one-dimensional at best. Next we have Mekamaru or Kokichi. I think puppet manipulation has multiple uses, but it's limited to the amount of things it can do with the puppet. Maybe if it was a panda being controlled, could be useful. I'd actually put it right here, below Cloning Technique, because you can use it defensively, you can also use it offensively, but Cloning Technique might have a really strong person that clones. Puppet is really dependent on the puppet, it fits there. Now specifically the puppets that he controls, Mini Mekamaru is, I mean it's not even situational, it just exists. I would place it above Heavenly Restriction. It does have some usefulness, I suppose. Then we have Ultimate Mechamaru. He does have a number of different uses with this, but Ultimate Mechamaru is not that strong. I'd put it at one-dimensional at best. Then we have Absolute Mechamaru. It goes somewhere in B tier. The question is it better than Black Flash or is it not? I think it's better than Black Flash, to be honest. It does deal out a lot of damage. Mahito only escaped because he's Idle Transfiguration. Then we have Tool Manipulation. Now we haven't seen a lot of usage in terms of offensive capabilities. We've seen it being used well in a support role. I'd say it's situational at best. Above Simple Domain, since Simple Domain requires a domain. Okay, next up we have Nanami, and he has Revealing One's Hand combined with Overtime, which is another binding wall. So Nanami basically is willing to work a specific amount of time, and if he goes over that time, he starts to get a power up. I think this is one-dimensional at best. It's like a multiplier on his offensive abilities, and it's relatively decent. Next up we have his ratio technique, which breaks up a person or their body parts into different proportions and puts a specific ratio where the most damage will be dealt, which is highly multiplied. And he uses this in combination with his environment as well, which is relatively decent. Though I think this is not that strong. I think I'd put this in A tier. Is it better than Straw Doll technique? I do think it is because it also has defensive capabilities. Next up we have Yuta, and I think Yuta's ability is just straight up broken. We haven't seen the limitations of his ability, but if he can copy pretty much any ability on this list, he's just better than everything else there is, isn't it? Okay, next up we have Suguru Geto's Curse Spirit Manipulation. This is a pretty broken ability, and we've seen him be super strong with it and get special grade with it as well. This goes above Idle Transfiguration because it gives him a specific boost as well, and he doesn't have any ceiling because of it. Then we have Maximum Uzumaki, which is born from the Curse Spirit. This is like everything is just condensed into one massive burst of power. I think it's one-dimensional at best, but it is a pretty strong one, so it goes at the top of B. Then we see his Curse Spirit Fungus, which is like a prison sort of a thing for holding a person. It's situational at best. We've seen a grade 2 curse. I guess he can use this offensively and defensively, but it's one-dimensional at best. Grade 3 curses, this goes even lower. Then we have the Kujisake Onna. I don't know how to pronounce that, but I think this goes somewhere in B tier as well. Then we have this vehicle. It is absolutely, it just exists, honestly. Then we have the Rainbow Dragon, which can be used to pierce through things, and it's also like an armor. This fits somewhere near the Black Flash. Then we have the Flying Stingray. This also just exists. Next we have the Hookworm. We've seen Geto use this quite a lot, so it's definitely effective in some cases, but it's largely one-dimensional. Okay, next up we have Satoru Gojo. This is where it gets really complicated, but according to what the wiki says, this technique brings the concept of infinity into reality, allowing the user to manipulate and distort space at will. This is an interesting one. It is the thing that allows him to not get hit by anyone, pretty defensively strong, and it also allows him to create a bunch of offensive abilities like the Curse Technique, red and blue and purple. Limitless also has long distance teleportation. I think it's a pretty strong one, and it has multiple uses, so I'd put this somewhere in A tier. Curse Technique Blue. This is one-dimensional, but it's pretty strong. It pulls people towards a specific direction, or it could just pull an entire environment in towards that direction. Put it above Disaster Flames. Then we have Curse Technique Red, which compared to Curse Technique Blue, instead of pull, it pushes. It's pretty strong. Again, pretty much the same as Blue. We haven't seen it be particularly useful outside of Blue's abilities. Okay, next up we have Six Eyes, which allows Gojo to see the flow of cursed energy in extreme detail and gives him the ability to use that flow to read curse techniques. It's kind of like the Sharingan of Jujutsu Kaisen. The eyes also allow for ultra precise control over the user's cursed energy, which is indispensable for properly utilizing the Limitless technique. So I think this is pretty high up as well. I think Six Eyes is below Limitless. Next up we have Curse Technique Purple, which is like a combination of the blue and red, which repels and attracts, but in this state it's like this massive blast of energy which just tears through all environments, so it's good in that sense. Next up we have Kenjaku. So his first ability that we've seen is Possession, where he's taken control of Geto. This could be pretty useful, and he also retains the abilities from the previous people he's possessed, so this gives him a pretty good edge. Then we have the death paintings. This is situational at best. You don't know what you're gonna end up with. Yeah, I guess it would be high. And then we have his smallpox deity, which was born out of the cursed spirit manipulation, and it has a domain expansion of its own, which I think is pretty interesting. But it is pretty one-dimensional. I imagine most of these characters would be able to break out of whatever it throws at them, so I would put it right here, above the hookworm. And with Sukuna, we should start with his dismantle first. His dismantle is like a single shot slicer that just tears through everything it comes in contact with. It's one-dimensional, but it's pretty damn strong. Next up we have Cleave, which is like a combination of multiple dismantles into one. This goes right up here. It's not probably as strong as Maximum Uzumaki and Curse Technique Purple, which are like super damaging and they don't really have a ceiling. Cleave does seem to have a ceiling. Next up we have Fire Arrow, which is kinda like Jogo's Disaster Flames, but it's a stronger version of that, so I would put this above Disaster Flames. Next up we have Mei with her Blackbird manipulation. It's useful in the sense that it can provide scouting and it can also do a lot of damage. The only person that's been able to survive the bird strike has been Satoru Gojo, so for most other people it would be pretty hard to deal with. Okay, next up we have Megumi with his 10 shadows. He has the Divine Dogs, Nue, Great Serpent, Toad, the Well's Unknown Abyss, Max Elephant, Rabbit Escape, and one other that we haven't seen so far in the anime. Overall, their use cases are multiple. They're both offensively good and they're defensively good as well. I would say this is definitely a high A tier. The question is it above Limitless and Six Eyes? Okay, now that I think about it, why is Limitless down here at A? It should definitely be up there in the S tier. Okay, next up we have the domains, so we're gonna add a row below. Okay, first up we have the Malevolent Shrine, which is used by Sukuna, so I definitely put this at the top tier of the domains. He can reduce pretty much anyone to dust, and I don't think anyone can actually win in a straight up domain battle with him, so it's definitely up there. Okay, next up we have the Unlimited Void by Gojo, which is pretty interesting to look at least, and as opposed to Sukuna's infinite amounts of just like guts and stuff, I think Unlimited Void is interesting where it just overwhelms the person's brain, and we've seen them use it in a small effect within the train station as well. I would put it below Malevolent Shrine. Then we have the Smallpox domain. The person had to stay inside the coffin for a specific amount of time for the disease to take place. It's kind of situational and it could work against one person. Next up we have the Coffin of the Iron Mountain by Jogo. Jogo's overall abilities were pretty damn strong, just the problem was he was up against Gojo, so there's not much he can do against it. So next up we have the Horizon of the Captivating Skan. Sorry, I don't know the pronunciation. This was used by Dagon and it was pretty decent. I'd put it somewhere below Jogo's, right there. Next up we have Mahito's Self-Embodiment of Perfection, where he can use Idle Transfiguration, which is up there in S tier, without actually having to touch any person, which is pretty strong. I would put this above Coffin of the Iron Mountain. Before we finish, we're gonna add Chimera Shadow Garden. This is the last one that we've seen in the anime. If he had more cursed energy, I imagine this would be a lot stronger. He can summon multiple versions of the 10 shadows, and he can also use it in multiple different ways to sort of maximize the shadows that are available there. I would put this below Self-Embodiment of Perfection because it's not a one-hit thing. It's like multiple different hits that a person has to consistently dodge against. I would place this above Jogo and Dagon's. Anyway, let's move on to the manga domains now. First up, we have the Time Cell Moon Palace by Naoya Zenin. This one was interesting. It's not exactly a one-hit domain. I would actually put this above Chimera Shadow Garden because the rules are so unique. Next up, we have Idle Death Gamble, which basically turns everything into a pachinko-themed domain where everything is happening according to a jackpot. I think I would put it above Self-Embodiment of Perfection because of the pachinko theme and the ability to essentially give a person unlimited burst energy. It's pretty strong. Okay, so then we have the Threefold Affliction by Yoruzu. I'd actually place this as the lowest domain because we didn't really see something special happen with it. It was just like a domain caught someone in it. Next up, we have the Womb Profusion by Kenjaku. This gave him a maximum Uzumaki within his domain. I would place this above the coffin just because it was Kenjaku's as opposed to Jogo's, but essentially these three are of the exact same level. Next up, we have the deadly sentencing. For me, this is a straight up top tier domain. The setting of this domain is so unique and the way it works is also so original. It's unlike any other domain. It would force a lot of characters to approach a fight in a very different way. So deadly sentencing is very easily top tier for me. Acceleration mode, he goes super fast. This is sort of multiple uses. It can be used to escape, but it can also be used to sort of attack, so I guess it goes somewhere around here. The person that can use this has to be a cursed spirit. Then we have blood conversion. This is an ability by Choso, which really works well with blood manipulation, creating a ton of blood out of your cursed energy. I would say it is situational at best. I would put it right here. Okay, next up we have Triceratops mode, which is basically another multiplier for Panda and his base abilities. I would just put this above the Gorilla mode. Then we have the Manji kick. This is pretty much a kick. Nothing too special about it. At best, it's like a divergent fist in the form of a kick. I would put it somewhere around here. Then we have Jogo again with his maximum meteor, which was like his disaster flames pulled to the absolute limit, and he destroyed a good portion of a city with this ability. So I would say this is one-dimensional, but it is definitely very strong. I will put this right here because there is a ceiling to this ability. Next up we have, I don't know how this is pronounced either. He basically is like a cursed spirit that Kenjaku controls, and he can control a ton of cockroaches and use them to create even more cockroaches and use their liquids to sort of inhibit the other person. So it fits right here. Then we have surveillance. This is situational at best. I would put this right here. Then we have gravity control, which allowed him to control the gravity all around him and deal damage through that. I would actually say that this fits right below construction. Ganesha is another spirit that Kenjaku has in his arsenal, but he describes it as having the ability to remove any kind of obstacle or even a concept, but can move any physical object. So this goes in one-dimensional, right above the rainbow dragon. Next up we have Sukuna with his spider web. This was specifically used defensively, but it is a combination of his dismantle ability in a way that it's spread out in his area of effect. I would put this in a low A tier. Then we have a lesser version of the reversed curse technique. I'd put this in C tier because if a person is hurt, you can definitely use them. Then we have Charles Bernard with his G War Staff. So the War Staff is a long spear with a pen-shaped tip, and it allows him to draw the blood from the person and use it to create a manga panel which is slightly in the future. It's unique, it's original, and it allows a lot of defensive abilities along with offensive abilities. Next up we have Love Rendezvous. I would put this as one-dimensional. Next up we have Lightning Discharge, which was the ability to shock a person with lightning, but the problem is he needed time to recharge before using it again, despite the fact that it was very strong. Then we have Mythical Beast Amber. It's just like a massive multiplier. He just uses it to fight at the end, so it's not too good. It's a strong C tier ability, but it's situational because you cannot use it again. Then we have Tengen's Immortality. It's cool that it's immortal, but it's not really gonna help you do anything, so I will put it right here. Okay, next up we have Takako's Sky Manipulation, which allowed her to fly and control the sky and also turn it into her clothing. She can sort of hit the sky and then the sky hits the person. It's interesting, it's definitely got some multiple uses, but we haven't seen it in action all too much. I would overall place it in A tier, right above acceleration mode. Then we have Utahime's Solo Forbidden Area, which is like a boost multiplier type thing for any person that she applies it on. I would put this at situational at best, because at least you can help someone out with it. Next up we have Yuki and her ability of Star Rage / Bomba Ye. It adds virtual mass to anything that she wants to add it to, and it increases the impact of anything by a few multiples and deals a lot of damage because of that. So I'm gonna place it right here, because we don't really know if there's a ceiling to this ability. Then we have her Shikigami Garuda. Outside of Star Rage, it's not too useful, so I would put it in one-dimensional. Next up we have the Hollow Wicker Basket, which is like the simple domain, so it goes right here. After this we have his other ability called Contractual Recreation, which allows anything that he wants to sort of come into life, whether it's giving a person a spa treatment or bringing a whole house above a person. I would actually put this right below Possession. Then we have Helicopter Hair by Hava. Doesn't seem like there's any offensive purpose to this thing, so this goes to situational at best. Right next to the Flying Stingray. Okay, next up we have Hana with Jacob's Ladder. This is pretty useful against curses, but it's not too useful in a normal fight. I think it's a high C tier, but it was not able to bring down Sukuna. Then we have Dhruv's Shikigami. They are able to do some damage, but they're not particularly strong, so I would just place it next to the Hookworm. Then we have Airplane Hair, which is basically like Helicopter Hair, but she can actually use it somewhat offensively. C tier, but it's kind of stronger. Then we have Claws. We saw a person who never really landed a hit, so they're not too useful. Then we have Exploding Flesh, which was one-dimensional again, but at least it exploded and did some damage, so I would place this somewhere above Garuda. Then we have another Zenin showing up with Earth Arms, which is a bunch of arms born from the earth. I imagine the more amount of cursed energy a person has, the more stronger this ability would be. So it's one-dimensional, but I would place it a bit higher up. Okay, next we have Jinichi Zenin's Missile Fists, which were relatively strong punches that were powered by cursed energy and made it turn into like a missile with its impact. Next up we have Ogi Zenin, Maki's father's ability, Blazing Courage. Not only did it amplify the ability, it also sort of gave him DPS. So I would place this somewhere close to the Disaster Flames. Next up we have Ranta Zenin's Paralyzing Gaze. It was used against Maki Zenin, who had just gotten a power up, so she was pretty much able to break through it, but I imagine if it was a more proficient user with higher cursed energy, this would be a relatively strong spell as well. However, it is one-dimensional. Then we have Atsuya's Evening Moon Sword Drawing, which is another sort of sword drawing from the new Shadow style, but we never really saw it in action, so I guess it just exists. Next we have Remy with her Scorpion Hair. It was not a very special attack because even after getting hit by it, Megumi was able to brush it off. One-dimensional, and I'll put it right there. After this we have Ice Formation. We've seen her use this in a few different ways. The first was Frostcom, and the second one is Icefall, which helped her get a platform with which she could fly, and then that platform could throw down icicles and also come crashing down on a person and just freeze them completely. So this is pretty strong. I would put it right next to the Spider Web. After this we have Cursed Energy Discharge by Ryu. So overall it's a very strong blast that just comes towards the person. I would put it in a similar category as Maximum Meteor. Next up we have Judgeman. This is the Shikigami during the domain expansion Deadly Sentencing, but on its own we haven't really seen it in action, so we don't know. This goes into D, just exists for now. Next up is one of my favorites, Comedian. This goes straight into S tier. This is a hilarious and amazing ability. Anything that the guy finds funny is going to come into existence. So he doesn't get hurt, nothing happens to him, he's just able to dish out damage without actually taking damage. Pretty crazy. At worst, it might be high A tier. Next, we have Private Pure Love Train. This is born from the Idle Death Gamble, and it uses different train elements like a door to apply pressure in the real world outside of the domain. So it's interesting, but it is one-dimensional. I would put this right here below Garuda. And with that, we've completed all the abilities in the tier list. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.